Have you ever wondered how far betrayal can push a person? For Max, a chance encounter on a crowded street led to a story he'd never forget. A man who lost everything to the woman he loved, only to come back stronger. This stranger's tale of heartbreak, resilience, and a twisted twist of fate would change Max's life forever. And by the end, you'll see that sometimes rock bottom is just the beginning. On a bustling, noisy street, as vendors shouted out prices and crowds swirled in a constant rush, a young teenager named Max walked with a typical teenage air of both boredom and curiosity. It was the kind of curiosity that drew him toward anything unusual, something out of the ordinary from his typical, predictable day. And then, just like that, he spotted him. The man stood out instantly. An elderly gentleman, sharply dressed in a tailored suit that practically screamed, "Yes, I know this was expensive." He leaned against a sleek black car, its glossy surface and shining rims telling the world it wasn't the kind of car anyone parked on this street, unless they wanted to turn a few heads. Max slowed down, eyes narrowing, trying to take in everything about this stranger who clearly belonged in some posh boardroom, not here in the middle of the street chaos. Unable to resist, Max stepped up and, in a slightly awkward yet curious tone, asked, "Nice car. How'd you end up like this?" His gesture took in the suit, the car, and the man's air of success that practically oozed confidence. The old man looked at Max, studying him with a smile that held a mix of amusement and something almost wistful, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Someone to ask, someone to listen. He motioned to a nearby bench, inviting Max to sit with a simple, "You've got a few minutes, kid?" Curiosity sparked. Max took a seat, his mind buzzing with questions. As he settled in, the man leaned back and said, almost to himself, "You know, I wasn't always this." He gestured with a casual wave, as if even he found his current life a little surreal. And then, like flipping a switch, he launched into his story, transporting both himself and his young listener back to a very different time in his life. "I wasn't always like this, kid," he said, a faint smile touching his lips as he looked past Max, back to a time only he could see. "There was a time when I was just another guy, grinding away in an office, coming home to a little apartment and thinking I had everything I needed." Max raised an eyebrow. "You mean without all this?" he asked, motioning to the slick car and the glinting cufflinks that probably cost more than Max's entire wardrobe. "Without all this," the old man echoed with a chuckle. "Back then, happiness was just coming home to my wife. We were living in this tiny apartment that was so small, I swear you could flip an egg from the couch. But we had enough, or at least, I thought we did." He paused, leaning back, as if the memories held a weight that even his expensive suit couldn't support. At first, she seemed happy too, but I started noticing things, like the way she'd stare at those glossy magazines full of designer clothes and penthouses. One night, I caught her looking at some five-star resort in the Bahamas, and I joked, "Dream on, babe. We need a lottery ticket for that." Max laughed, but the old man's face remained still. "She didn't laugh," he said, his voice dropping. "She just looked at me and said, 'Everyone else seems to have more.' There was just like that. More? More what? More cars, more clothes, more life?" I tried to brush it off. Told her, "Hey, we're happy, right? All that other stuff, it's just noise." "And she agreed?" Max asked, already knowing the answer. "Not exactly." The man's voice took on a bitter edge. "Happy? Sure," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But imagine what it'd be like to really live." Every word was like a knife slicing through what I thought we had. Suddenly, the dreams weren't enough for her, and she was about to show me just how much more she wanted. The old man's face hardened, his eyes narrowing as if reliving the scene in excruciating detail. "Then came the day that changed everything," he continued, his voice edged with a bitterness that made Max lean in, hanging on every word. "It was just another ordinary day. I left the office early, planning to surprise her with takeout from that little Thai place she loved." He shook his head, almost laughing at his own naivete. "But as I walked down the street, I heard the roar of an engine. And there was a convertible sports car, cherry red, gliding down the street like it owned the whole damn city. Behind the wheel was some guy, smug as could be, with sunglasses on even though the sun was practically down. Max's jaw dropped a little. He already had a bad feeling about where this was going. And in the passenger seat, the man continued, his voice tight, was my wife. My wife, laughing and leaning over like she hadn't a care in the world. She saw me standing there, mouth half open, looking like an idiot. And you know what she did? Max shook his head, eyes wide. She smirked. The old man let out a short, bitter laugh. That's right. She actually had the nerve to smirk at me. The car rolled up to the intersection, and like an idiot, I marched right up to them. I knocked on the window, and he clenched his fist, almost as if he were back there, rapping on that tinted glass. I said, "What the hell is going on?" "What did she say?" Max asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. The man's lips twisted. She rolled down the window, looked me right in the eyes, and said, "Maybe if you were half the man he was, I wouldn't have to be here." And then her new friend laughed, right in my face, mind you. "Go find yourself a real life, kid," he sneered, giving me a little shove back, like I was nothing more than an obstacle on the sidewalk. Max felt a twist in his stomach. "What did you do?" The old man shook his head, a rueful smile on his face. "Nothing. What could I do?" I stood there, humiliated, as they drove off, laughing all the way down the street. That moment shattered everything. Every dream, every promise. Suddenly, happiness was just a cruel joke, something I'd been fool enough to believe in. The old man paused, letting the weight of the story settle. Max could practically feel the humiliation radiating off him, even years later. "So, what, you just went home after that?" Max asked, his voice barely a whisper, like he was afraid of disturbing a painful wound. The man snorted. "Oh, I went home, all right. Not like I had anywhere else to go. By the time I got there, it was dark, and I could still feel that guy's smug laugh rattling around in my head. My fists were clenched so tight, my nails were digging into my palms. I walked through that door, ready to confront her. Demand answers, demand something." Max leaned in. And I walked in to find her packing. He barked out a short, humorless laugh, one that echoed off the empty space in his memory. She looked up at me, completely calm, like she'd just been waiting for me to show up, so she could get on with her night. "Oh, you're here," she said, as if I were the unexpected guest in my own apartment. Max couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You mean she just—" "Oh, she was ready, kid," the man replied, nodding. Turns out she and her new friend had been planning this for a while. She looked me up and down, like she was taking inventory of all the ways I'd let her down. She even had the nerve to say, "This place isn't really working for me anymore. I need more." Max shook his head, dumbfounded. "Didn't you try to stop her?" "Of course I did," the old man snapped, his voice sharp with frustration. "I tried everything, begging, shouting, bargaining. I asked her if she even remembered the life we'd dreamed of, the promises we made. You know what she said? She looked at me like I was some naive fool, shook her head and said, 'Dreams are for kids. I want a real life.'" Max's mouth dropped open. "And then she just left?" "Not so fast," the man replied, his tone sour with irony. "She wasn't leaving empty-handed. No, she'd already set things in motion. That apartment? The one I'd broken my back to keep? Turns out her new friend had connections. By the next morning, she'd already put a claim on the place, had the paperwork drafted, and believe it or not, changed the locks. I came back from work to find myself locked out of my own life. Talk about a wake-up call. Max could hardly believe his ears. "So, she just took everything?" "Everything," the man repeated, his voice hollow. "Everything I thought I had, gone in a single day. I spent that night sleeping on a bench, probably one a lot like this one. For the first time in years, I was a man without a home, without a future, and without a clue of what to do next." The old man leaned back, his eyes drifting somewhere distant, his hands now resting loosely on his knees. Max could see a hint of fire in his gaze, as if telling this part of the story reignited something buried. "So, there I was, locked out, broke, betrayed, and humiliated. You'd think I'd hit rock bottom, right? But here's a fun fact about rock bottom, kid. It's always a little lower than you think. Every time I thought, it can't get worse than this, Life showed me it could, in fact, get just a little worse. Max listened, eyes wide, caught between sympathy and morbid curiosity. The next day, I dragged myself into the office, the old man continued, thinking maybe I could just lose myself in work. After all, what else did I have? I looked like I'd crawled out of a dumpster, but I didn't care. Just kept my head down, hoping no one would notice or ask me any questions. But my boss, she noticed. Max's brows furrowed. Your boss? What did she do? The man allowed a small, almost fond smile. She called me in her office. Now, you gotta picture her, a woman with a no-nonsense vibe, the kind who could command a room with just a look. She was smart, tough, but with a heart she tried to hide under all that professionalism. She'd been in her position long enough to know when someone was drowning. Max leaned forward. So, what did she say? The man's eyes softened slightly, as if he were watching that scene unfold again. She looked at me for a long time, just studying me with those sharp, perceptive eyes of hers. Finally, she said, You look like you've been hit by a truck. Sit down and tell me what happened. And you know what, kid? For some reason, I actually told her. Not everything, but enough. Max's mouth curled into a smirk. But she didn't expect to play therapist that day, huh? The old man laughed, the sound carrying a hint of surprise. Yeah, probably not. But she listened. Didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just listened. After I'd finished, she leaned back, took a deep breath, and said, Look, you've had the worst day of your life. But I'll tell you something. If you want to turn this around, you're going to need to find something worth fighting for. Get up, dust yourself off, and start figuring out what comes next. Max nodded, hanging on every word. And you listen? The man shrugged, his face unreadable. Not at first. I mean, it's one thing to hear advice. It's another to believe it. I didn't feel like I had anything left to fight for. But she saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. I don't know what it was, but she refused to let me stay down. Every day, she'd check in, encourage me, even make sure I'd had something to eat. She didn't have to do any of that, but she did. Slowly, I began to feel a little less broken. Max's eyes flickered with a hint of admiration. Sounds like she was something special. More than I could have realized back then, the man replied softly. Over time, I stopped dreading going into work. We'd have coffee breaks together, just talking, sharing stories, plans, ideas. She pushed me to think about my future, encouraged me to dream bigger. And eventually, I started to see the world beyond my grief and humiliation. The man paused, letting the silence sink in, as if testing the weight of his next words. One night, after a particularly long workday, she invited me to dinner. Nothing fancy, just a little place nearby. We talked for hours. By the end of the night, it felt like she'd taken a hammer to my walls, the ones I'd built to keep the world out. I realized I'd found someone who saw me for more than just my mistakes and failures. She saw potential where I saw nothing but loss. Max gave a slow nod. So, you two became close? The old man's smile returned, a little softer, a little sadder. Closer than I'd expected. She offered me a place to stay for a while, said it was temporary just to help me get back on my feet. But those days turned into weeks, and I realized I was slowly piecing myself back together, with her at the center of it. I began to want something better, not just for myself, but for her, for us. Max's eyes sparkled with hope. Is that when you started to turn things around? The man nodded. She was relentless about it, always reminding me of what I was capable of, even when I wanted to give up. Finally, she looked me in the eyes one day and said, You've got too much talent to be sitting behind someone else's desk. Why don't you start your own company? Do something for yourself. For once. And you know what? I finally did. I walked into my boss's office, my old boss's office, and handed in my resignation. It was terrifying, but I knew that if I didn't take that chance, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. Max whistled, impressed. So that was it? Just like that. The man's eyes drifted back to that distant past, the memories now less painful, as though time and triumph had smoothed over their rough edges. Starting that business was like wading through quicksand. Every single day, he said, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. Every decision felt like it could sink me. I made so many mistakes in those early days, I lost count. But each time I was ready to quit, she was there, reminding me why I'd started in the first place. Max tilted his head, impressed, but skeptical. So, she stuck with you through all of it? The late nights, the failures, everything. Every bit of it, the man replied. She believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. It's one thing to have someone cheer for you from the sidelines. It's another thing entirely when they're right there beside you, rolling up their sleeves and fighting alongside you. With her at my side, I learned to fight, to claw my way up from nothing. And eventually, we began to see results. Max's face lit up, mirroring the spark in the old man's eyes. So, things started to take off? Oh, they did? Bit by bit. We started winning clients, building a reputation, and hiring a small team. Soon enough, that tiny office felt too small. It was exhilarating, finally seeing something I'd built with my own two hands start to grow. And it wasn't just the business. It was the life we were creating together. We worked tirelessly, putting in every ounce of energy we had, not because we wanted wealth or status, but because we wanted something we could call our own. The man glanced down, chuckling softly, almost to himself. Funny thing, isn't it? I spent years in a cubicle dreaming of stability, and now here I was living on the edge, pouring every cent we had back into this venture. And yet, for the first time in my life, I felt truly alive. Max grinned. So, you and your new partner built it from the ground up? From the ground up, every step. I became someone I barely recognized, more confident, more resilient. But it wasn't just me. She changed too. We weren't just partners in business. We were partners in life. And slowly, we turned that little company into something far bigger than I'd ever dreamed of. Max's eyes flickered with excitement. So you went from nothing to all this? He asked, gesturing to the car, the suit, the clear signs of a life well lived. The man nodded, but his expression held a tinge of sadness. Yes, but success has a way of bringing things full circle. Max looked confused. What do you mean? The man's jaw tightened, his fingers tapping lightly on his knee. Remember that ex-wife of mine? Well, life decided it had one more surprise in store for me. By this time, my business had grown into a small empire. We were thriving, my partner and I, personally and professionally. And then, one day, out of the blue, she came back. Max's eyes widened in shock. Wait, she tried to come back? The old man nodded, his lips curling into a wry smile. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was in my office, running through some quarterly numbers when I heard a knock at the door. I looked up, and there she was. Same smirk, same designer purse swinging from her arm. Only this time, she wasn't the one looking down on me. No, this time, she was desperate, her expression just a shade short of pleading. Max's jaw dropped. She actually thought she could just waltz back into your life? The man chuckled, a dark satisfaction in his tone. Oh, she thought she could do more than that. Turns out, her wealthy lover wasn't as savvy as he seemed. His family fortune had run dry, thanks to a series of terrible investments and a bit of, well, indulgent spending. They were barely scraping by, and when the money dried up, so did her dreams of the high life. So, she came to me, hoping for a fresh start. Max shook his head, half in disbelief, half in admiration. And, did you? The man's eyes hardened. I gave her a polite smile and told her, thanks, but I've already found everything I need. You should try it sometime. And then I walked out, leaving her standing there, stunned. She didn't expect that. I don't think she ever truly believed I'd move on, let alone succeed. Max let out a low whistle. Wow, that's cold. But I guess she had it coming. The man shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe life just has a way of evening things out. All I know is when I walked away that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, closure. Real, honest closure. I didn't need her validation, her approval, or her pity. I'd built something for myself, a life, a love, and a business that were entirely my own. And that was worth more than all the more she'd ever wanted. Max looked down, absorbing everything he'd just heard, every twist and turn in the man's story. So, is that what you'd say made you successful? The company? The money? The old man shook his head slowly. No, Mac's success isn't about the money or the car or any of this. He gestured at himself. Success is knowing that, no matter how many times life knocks you down, you have it in you to get back up. It's finding the people who stand by you, who see you when the world looks the other way. That's success. The rest of this? He laughed, waving a hand at the world around him. This is just a bonus. Max smiled, feeling a mixture of awe and inspiration. Thanks for telling me your story. I think I get it now. The man gave him a nod, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of someone who had seen the best and worst of life. Just remember, kid, sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most meaningful new beginnings. And with that, he stood up, brushed off his suit, and with a final nod to Max, walked away, leaving him sitting there, contemplating what the old man had just shared. Max watched him go, a sense of awe lingering in his heart as he realized that maybe, just maybe, success was something deeper than he'd ever imagined. Max sat there, staring at the space where the old man had just been, his mind buzzing with 1,000 thoughts. The story felt unreal, like something out of a movie, and yet there it was played out in front of him in real life. The old man had come from rock bottom, had fought against betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak, and somehow, he'd risen from it all, emerging stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. It was almost hard to believe. A few days passed, and Max found himself going about his daily life with the old man's story replaying in his head, shaping his thoughts in ways he didn't quite understand. The old man's journey, how he'd built a life of his own, how he'd found redemption, and how he'd discovered something deeper than just success, had left an undeniable mark. One afternoon, while Max was walking past the same bustling street where he'd first met the man, he heard a familiar voice call out, "So, Max, you figured it all out yet?" He spun around and saw him. The same old man, but this time, leaning casually against the same black car, wearing that same suit, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Well, no, not yet, I guess," Max replied, a little sheepish. "But I keep thinking about what you said about finding something worth fighting for." The old man nodded, a knowing smile on his lips. "You don't have to have it all figured out at once. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, and trust me, no one's ever fully prepared for them." Max laughed nervously. "Yeah, but you sure seemed like you knew what you were doing." The old man raised an eyebrow, chuckling softly. "Oh, if only you knew. There were so many times I had no idea what I was doing. Max, half the time, I was just putting one foot in front of the other, hoping for the best. The trick isn't having all the answers. It's knowing that, no matter what, you'll find a way through." They stood there for a moment, the sounds of the street around them, the city pulsing with its usual chaotic energy. The man seemed at ease, completely unfazed by the rush and noise around him, like he'd made peace with everything. "You know, Max," he said thoughtfully, "when you're young, it's easy to think success is something shiny, something you can show off. But what really matters is the things no one else can see. The things that keep you grounded, the ones you'd hold on to even if everything else was stripped away." Max considered this, realizing it was something he hadn't truly thought about before. "So, you don't miss any of it? The old life?" The man looked up, his face calm and assured. "No, I don't miss it. Not the life, not the people, not the woman who chose money over love. Because I've got something better. I've got peace. And for a long time, I didn't even know that was what I needed." Max nodded slowly, feeling the weight of those words. "So, I just have to keep going, even if I don't know what comes next." "That's exactly it," the old man said, clapping a hand on Max's shoulder. "Keep going, keep building, but don't lose sight of what matters along the way. The right people, the right moments, that will make it all worth it." As Max absorbed the words, the old man straightened, giving him one last nod. "Take care of yourself, kid. And remember, you're stronger than you think." With that, the man turned and stepped into his car, the engine purring as he pulled away, merging seamlessly into the chaos of the city, leaving Max standing there changed. He watched until the car was just a dot in the distance, a memory blending into the rest of the busy street. Max took a deep breath, his heart feeling lighter, yet fuller somehow. He knew he didn't have all the answers. He didn't know exactly where he was going or what he'd be fighting for, but he knew this much. He would keep going, keep building, and hold tight to the things that mattered most. As he turned to leave, he felt a newfound sense of purpose. After all, sometimes the worst betrayals did lead to the most meaningful new beginnings.